this is what I've studied over a long time.
Is that from somebody else?
Yeah, there's lots of information I can source from. And this is how communities that have exited out of the system...
What we would call primitive societies, but early societies, let's say.
Sorry?
We would now say primitive societies, but you're talking about early societies were like that.
They still like that today. There's lots of societies still on Earth that operate at a highly evolved...
High-level societies, or what we...
Oh, they can be technologically primitive, but they're still highly evolved. There are societies on Earth running on that principle.
Yep.
And I can give you an example.
Yep.
When we were in Bali, we had a particular taxi driver that was taking us everywhere. And he took us to his village, right? And in his village, there were many, many families there, all related. Uncles and aunts, grandparents,
the jungle, outside.
a lot of children, all that, right? And it was so full of activity and full of life. And he said to us, "Oh, you're so lucky, you're so rich." He was talking about the dross, And I looked at him and I said, "No, you are the one that's rich. Look at the wealth here." And what is the wealth? The collections of families, all looking after each other, right? They grow their own food. They support each other. Do we do that in our society? I would say no.
To a very limited level only, yeah.
Yeah, if you want to define wealth only in terms of currency, what wealth is there in that?
Yeah.
Whoops.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just one example.
This is my wealth.
Yeah? What's your wealth?
Silver.
Silver.
So sorry, people. Well, I won't be invited back, will I?
Yes, you will. Okay, so last week, online blogs was suggested that we should build up a website where we can blog each other all the time. And that can work. I still prefer the face-to-face communication for developing ideas.
We can do that on the net as well.
Yeah, you can do that on the web.
Zoom.
But if you have, say, a Facebook environment, 99% of it is...
Facebook. Zoom, maybe, yeah.
All sorts of rubbish.
Yeah, like Zoom's like Skype, it's private. You can get a Zoom account for nothing.
Yeah, sure.
Collection of 20 people.
Yeah. But, maybe those are tools that we can use, and maybe there's somebody who's going to volunteer to set it all up. I don't know if I can do it.
I can do it. I'll bring the guy here, Chief. He'll set it up for us.
Yeah, all right.
What will you use? Yahoo?
Zoom.
Zoom.
Platform called Zoom, yeah.
Never
Send
heard.
it, double
Okay.
free, up to 20 people, might even be 50. If you pay $12 a month, it goes up to 200. So you can initially only need 20, so it's free.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it's a video call program.
Yeah, so we can set something
It's
like
like
that.
style, but you can send messages, send files, videos, photographs.
Yeah.
So I could put a photo on it, I could tag selected people, and then would the other members of the group go, okay, I need tag, but I can log in and see what was being discussed. So my process of tagging would perhaps form some sort of subgroup that the rest of the members could then join into.
So like Facebook.
No, it's more like Skype.
Cool.
It's a standalone
It's better than
blog.
Skype, yeah.
And would Proton Mail link to it?
Not
I
necessarily.
don't know if other mails can.
No.
Because they
It may not be private.
Environment, All of them, yes. I'll bring Chief. Chief will come here. And
Who's that?
My business partner's Chief. Chiefy fan. Chinese Vietnamese. It doesn't matter who he is, he's in Australia, right?
IT expert, obviously.
No, he isn't. No, he's an economist and an accountant. But he's a friend of mine. He wants part of our businesses. I'll bring him along and he's got a Zoom. You'd be able to use his Zoom account if you want.
Okay. I've actually got a Magpie House blog. I just never enacted it. Maybe I should check it out. But I've also suggested set up your own Proton Mail account. It's a free and secure service, and I recommend that one because I've looked at a number of other encrypted mail systems, and this one specifically, or some of the other ones say that if an authority wants this information, we have to hand it over to them. And I'm thinking, hang on a sec, that's not very secure.
That's why I don't like Skype.
Whereas this one did not have that clause. Yeah.
Proton is coming from Switzerland. It's being created out of
That's good.
where they searched or scientifically had this thing going to discover protons and whatever. So,
I think Soren knows of legislation that they talked about bringing in that force any ISP company to give a government backdoor access. It was the same legislation that featured when that reporter, whoever, came into Australia from Thailand or something and was required to hand over his phone with the password, and when it came back it had been bugged in Sydney.
in relation to this subject, today Paul and I had watched a YouTube from Robert David Steele, and in that one he speaks about hashtag Google, how did you call it? Kind of how all these big tech companies are basically censoring us, from Google to Facebook to Twitter to
Instagram.
I can't remember, but it's worth listening to his information, because he's in a process of setting up a new internet to get away from the Google, because Google is basically censoring us. And
Google's a very, very dangerous organisation.
Exactly. So we don't want our.
I like it, but it's a very dangerous. Google.
Huh?
Power.
Oh,
They've got their own AI.
No,
Google.
when you type in your
Google.
it's just
Google.
a search.
What about it?
Oh, they're very.
They're a very dangerous organisation to us as a species.
Listen to the Robert David Steele. It gives you an understanding of it.
They're powerful.
What's so dangerous about Google's going to jump out of the screen and get it?
I'll give you one.
Collecting information back,
exactly.
that's all.
I just
Whenever you
give
get
one.
online.
What do you mean, whatever you type and search for?
Whatever you're searching, it's collecting information about you, and they use that for their campaigns. They sell the information on
To the government.
Well, it could go to the government.
The mafia.
Or they
the worker.
just
Mafia.
Anybody, yeah. It's
No,
available to the highest buyer, the bidder. It's
Mafia's
money,
our
yeah.
friends.
No, it's not.
Anyway, I'll finish up what I'm saying,
Hold on, there's a
I'm
very big,
interested in
there's a,
hearing
and then I'll hand this over.
no, there's a very big point here that should
No,
be
what happens
made.
to the stick?
This is
That's
it.
it. It's the
No, it's
biggest
that.
I think we're going to use the
That's the
raw.
biggest thing.
Yeah, okay.
It's going to work better.
No, I just want
No,
to
It looks too much like a pistol.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Hold
what
on, you
It's
ask the
twisted
question, what's wrong with
raw.
Google? Let me tell you what's wrong with it. That they put the biggest amount of money into AI, artificial intelligence, and if you're a little bit frightened of what's going to happen with artificial, you just got to worry about that. They have huge amounts, and they're about to actually put AI on doing things at control levels, at various, in government and everything else. Control levels, not advice, control. Read about it, it's quite frightening.
And
Well, this is what I was saying before.
Anyway,
We're advancing technologically at an incredible
Yeah,
rate.
and
We're going to have
Google's
We're going to have facial recognition in the streets pretty soon, and I think they're already doing this in China, and they've already got the social credit system. And if you're poor in social credit, you won't be able to do so many of the things that we used to do. You won't be able to get a job. You won't be able to travel.
in China,
Anyway,
it's already activated.
That's already happening, and it's on the way here, from what we can tell.
Yeah, that's what they said on the Know Your Rights radio show.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I've been looking at that information for months.
It's not funny, no?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I laugh at it because I think it's laughable how ridiculous that sounds, you know.
It's called
This is how ridiculous the human race can get. That's true. Yeah. But my final point is, again, comes back to taxation and how we.
Anti-taxation.
Is it necessary in order for us to prosper and advance? And I'm going to throw up a couple of interesting projects like this one. Why not flood Lake Eyre? I think I mentioned it last week. And this is a big, big project, right? If we flooded Lake Eyre, we would change the climate to the point where perhaps, with some good science, we can change the rainfall patterns into Australia, and then Australia would become, instead of a largely desert, it'll become green.
Yeah.
And that would also harbour decentralisation. You know how we're piling ourselves into the big cities? That according to the information that we've worked with before, is not a good model. Big cities are a very poor way for societies to operate. And, we're disconnected from the land. We're no longer nurturing the land, and we become dependent on a machine, right? One of the documentaries said that in New York City, they have to, there's only a 3 days food supply. They have to keep the trucks coming in, right? And it'll be pretty much the same for Melbourne, right? So a project like this will cost a lot of money, right? And what we're saying is we don't need to raise the money from taxes, we don't need to raise the money from gold or silver, we don't need to raise the money from loans. We just create it, right? And that's what the People's Bank used to do. The Commonwealth Bank used to be able to do that. And the examples of that is the Nullarbor Railway and the Great Ocean Road. I'm sure there's other examples, those are two that I'm familiar with. If they can do that for those little projects, well, they're still big projects, why can't we do it for something like this? This idea is decades old. Why haven't we done it? It's because people think, you have to pay for it through taxes. Well, maybe that's incorrect. Maybe that's what's holding back this country. And actually, interestingly, the movie next week, I'll just see what I've got written up on it. Not very much. Pump Dry, the global crisis of vanishing groundwater, where so much water is being pumped from the ground that aquifers are being rapidly depleted and wells are going dry. And that applies in a big way in Australia. We're doing some pretty devastating damage to
North
this
of
country.
Victoria, what is the township? There's one township.
Sorry?
In North Victoria, there's towards the east somewhere. I can't remember the township. There's one township where they continuously come in with big tankers and just suck up the groundwater.
Yeah. Well, they're discovering that it's not an endless supply, and that's not a surprise. So why don't we do these other projects? There's another one, and there's probably others as well. This other one, is the Murray-Darling solution, and that's to pump water where it's fresh water, where it's very plentiful and just goes into the sea, up to the Great Divide and let it drain down there. You can see it on the map there, into the Murray-Darling system. And from what we've heard, we're destroying the Murray-Darling system. This is a very simple thing to do. It would cost a lot of money, but it would create a huge amount of employment, right? The argument against creating money for projects like this is that people say it will create inflation. However, it doesn't, from what I can see, from what I've researched, it doesn't create inflation if you contain it within the project itself, right? I saw it recently again on Scott Bartell's website. He says the same thing. You make sure that the money that you create is specifically for the project, and then you don't have inflation. What you've created is your own gold standard. You don't even need the gold. So you don't need tax, gold or loans. And the loans, as we know, is what we've been working with the World Banks. We borrow huge amounts of money from overseas, and because of that we can't pay it back. We can't pay the interest back, and eventually the country becomes bankrupt, and that's happened around the world from what I've seen. Yeah. So anyway, that's why I say these sort of items are also important in what we're examining. You know, we need to change the belief system that people have, that we have to pay taxes. Perhaps it's not necessary. If we just have a consciousness that we can actually share in the abundance that we create, then that changes the paradigm.
Should we perhaps start kind of
You want the question?
So-
yeah, that's what I was wondering.
I'm going to pass over to you now, because I've said my bit.
No, it's not. I was just wanted to initiate that we
Before
kind
I
of,
give it to you, I think Nick wants to do.
yeah, that we start some kind of aspect where we which we discuss. So, Nick, I think you have got something in the making. Or?
Yeah.